Fitting. And we are live. Welcome to the NFL Strategy Show Recap Edition. Time to break down what we saw in Week 2. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Adam Scherer. We are here to just talk a little bit about what we just saw for Sunday in the NFL. And shout out to No House Advantage for being the presenting sponsor of this show. We'll talk about No House Advantage in a little bit. But first, we got to start here. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. No audio issues on this one today. Adam, how was your NFL Sunday?
Wasn't a lot of fun. Started out well. I did really well on early slate cash, but made a swap on on the main slate to force in CD Lamb and Keenan Allen, and it cost me Cooper Kupp, so that hurt a lot. Made a little bit back because I then late swapped to the Bucks game, but so got lost there, got killed on afternoon cash, lost in tournaments. Wasn't a really good time.
Your cash lineup is something that I actually want to talk about in a little bit, but we'll start with the GPP exposures for the slant.
My actual cash lineup or the one that I ended up with?
Both. Okay. Because I think it's an interesting exercise to show everybody what you had and what you did at the end of the 1 o'clock games in order to give yourself a fighting chance. So, which ultimately worked. And I think that's makes for like an interesting talking point, because I bet a lot of people would not be doing the same thing. And I think that's something that people should be doing more often. But first, we're going to dive into looking at the exposures in the slant. Yesterday was kind of tough. Only 4 guys were projected with more ownership than 20%. Najee Harris, Keenan Allen, Chris Carson, CD Lamb. I don't really see any reason why those guys shouldn't have been owned in that way. To me, that was all just like perfectly normal, reasonable chalk. These guys were all from like 6,100 to 7K. Did you see anything in the ownership at the top end of this tournament that was surprising to you?
No, not surprising, but I do think that when you look at the ownership or the exposures rather that some of the good tournament players had, it's a trend that you'll see a lot as the season goes forward, where it's more difficult typically to find running back pivots. And there's a little bit less volatility at running back than wide receivers. Like when you look at the guys at the top, Harris, Allen, Carson, Lamb, looking at a lot of tournament players that I respect, over the field on Carson, over the field or around the field on Harris, and then like way under on Allen and Lamb, because it's just easier to find similar wide receivers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at it now, and you see like one out of a group will take the stand on that guy, and then the rest of the group will just be likely under, and it sort of just rotates through those wide receivers depending on who it is. Congrats to you, by the way. You did have the most Cooper Kupp of yourself, Rinpack, Steve, and Alex. So
yeah, and I lost more money than all of them.
That's always good. Oh yeah, most of this ownership at the top, like I don't have much to add. Past Lamb, Amari Cooper should have been highly owned. Cooper Kupp was chalk before the slate started, looked good. I have nothing to say there. Noah Fant, Tyler Higbee, like obviously Higbee busted pretty aggressively, but again, should have been owned. I don't see anything up at the top that is like actively surprising to me.
No, me neither. It's the guys that we expected to be there.
Oh, God, it's so crazy. And chalk did well. The 4 highest owned guys were perfectly acceptable. 19 points for Harris, 18 points for Keenan Allen, 15 for Chris Carson, 17 for CD Lamb. You want more, like you're looking for ceiling games, but none of those scores are ultra busty. They don't destroy your lineup by having it. The first guy or the first miss is a guy that I know you were heavy on, Amari Cooper. Anything you want to look back at for that, or is that just them's the breaks for NFL slates?
Yeah, it's just how it goes. I mean, he got hit in the hands in the end zone, didn't catch it. The whole game was just a joke, basically. One thing I noticed that was interesting in my exposures, like most people were similarly exposed to Cooper and to Lamb.
Yeah.
I was way under the field on Lamb and way over on Amari. And so I wasn't really sure why that was the case, but I went back and looked at my sheet and I had Cooper projected a couple points higher than Lamb, and then Lamb projected to be slightly higher owned. So I think what it was is the combination of that was just enough for me to say, okay, I just want more Amari, less less Lamb, whether that was, in Dallas stacks or as a one-off. So I think I was surprised when I saw the gap that I had, but I think with the numbers that I was using, it actually made sense to me.
Do you, just looking back in hindsight, and obviously, yes, you would rather have more CeeDee Lamb than Amari Cooper because CeeDee Lamb had more fantasy points. That's clear. Do you like the idea of taking a stand on one of the two, or would you like to go back in time and have that be more balanced? Like, do you think the projection that you had to start was off slightly?
No, I'm fine with it. Like,
okay,
especially in that case, I think Amari has a better season than Lamb. Like, I think Lamb's good, but I think Amari is the guy more often than not. And, like I said, if just, ignoring the names and teams or whatever, if I have someone at basically the same price projected 2 points higher at lower ownership, even, slightly lower ownership, in theory, I think I'm going to just want more of that player, especially when we're talking about guys that are highly owned. It's different if you're talking, 5% and 4% ownership, but if they're both 20% owned, give or take, and I think one player is, going to do better, I don't mind taking a stand on that one.
Okay. The other big spot where we saw a bust from a chalk play was certainly Tyler Higbee, 1.8 fantasy points. He was in 16% of lineups, just slightly behind Noah Fant. You dodged this one largely, only 8% Higbee. Rinpack similarly dodged Higbee, 4%. Steve, on the other hand, didn't. He went Higbee over Fant. Did you have a big separation between the two? Because you're basically underweight on both guys. You cast a pretty wide net at tight end. I think we talked about this a little bit in week one, but is this just a spot where if there's a mid-tier chalk tight end, you're probably not going to end up with a ton?
Yeah. I kind of did the same thing at tight end this week that I did week one. I agree Fant and Higbee coming in were the best plays in that range, but the floor is still just like non-existent for a lot of these tight ends. They have high ceilings for a cheap price tag without a doubt, but the floor is just pretty non-existent. There's a lot of volatility between them. So typically I'm going to just end up pretty spread out there.
Okay. Yeah. It looks like you were heavier on Dalton Schultz. No surprise there. Will Disley, ultimately light at tight. So, wow. I would have assumed that Gronk definitely got over 20. No tight end scored 20 fantasy points. Gronk got to 19.9. Didn't know that. I knew he had 2 touchdowns. I just assumed that he got over, but I guess.
Yeah, I thought he went over too.
Yeah. But 4 catches, 39 yards, 2 touchdowns. Just a touchdown maker. He's got 12 catches for 129 yards and 4 TDs in the first 2 weeks. Welcome back, Gronk. And scored 2 touchdowns in the Super Bowl. He scored 2 touchdowns in his last 3 games. 2 straight back. So good for you, Gronk, on that one. Yeah, I wish that I had more to say about ownership this week, but I don't know if it's just because there's no bye weeks right now. There are no extremes. Everything is really flat. Even the chalk isn't really the chalk. Like, yeah, we're trying to get away. We may be trying to get away from a 16% owned Noah Fant or Tyler Higbee, but they're also like no individual person is creating a lineup that is making things too chalky. We just didn't have that at all this week. So in a situation like this where nobody's breaking free, everything is flat, does that change the way that you want to try to build your lineups?
Not really. It's still all relative to each other. Still just basically trying to get the best lineups I can at the lowest ownership that I can. Typically like when you do get those, 50, 60% owned players, typically it's for a good reason. It's that we're expecting someone to get, 3 down work because their starter's out or something. We haven't had that case yet this year. I mean, even with the Raiders, like Kenny and Drake, 1 wasn't that cheap and 2 didn't have a good matchup. And 3, there's questions about what his workload was going to look like. So we haven't had that true like 3K. Okay, this is the only running back on the team type guy yet. So that's keeping the ownership in check. But no, still just basically the same concept.
Looks like Chris Carson was the 150 max play du jour at the top. Yeah. Something that I like to look at, and I know that we've looked at in the past when I, and Lofty did this show. Chris Carson had 24% ownership in the slant. If you filter the ownership for just the people that played 150 lineups in the contest, Carson's ownership jumps to 32.5. Generally speaking, to me, that's going to be a sign that Chris Carson was probably a better play than the tournament was looking at. In general, I'm going to assume that the 150 maxers of the slant are sharp enough money that it should be a good indicator of where people should have been. So Carson was heavier there.
Yeah.
Najee Harris, heavier there. He was the second most owned guy, but Carson passed Harris. It wasn't the same overall for the tournament. Keenan Allen, Lamb, Cooper, all rounding out the guys above 20. Anything that you looked at for like 150 maxer exposure that stood out to you?
I was going to say the Carson one. Like I have 8 people pulled up, 5 of whom work here, and then 3 other guys that I think are good. Rinpack only had 7% Carson. Outside of that, everyone else I'm looking at had least 41%. It's more spread out on Harris. Like a few people, Alex went over, Tom went over, Steve went over. I was a little bit under. Rinpack was a little bit under, but I think Harris was a little bit more just like neutral, whereas Carson, I think it just really stood out. And it's kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning, where it's just more difficult to find running back pivots at that price to give you a similar, ceiling, because there's just kind of less of them. Like receivers, most teams have 2 guys that realistically can have big games. You have a third that, could just kind of come out of nowhere. Running back, typically, it's obviously there's less of them to choose from. So I think it just makes sense for running backs, popular running backs, typically to be higher owned by 150 maxers. And then, you take some stands on lower owned receivers.
Stephon Diggs was another guy that took a giant jump up. I know that he was someone that you were pretty heavily exposed to. 12% owned in the slant yesterday, but 17% owned by 150 maxers. That's going to be another concentration. No part of that is surprising to me either. I expected a big day out of Diggs. 16 fantasy points is, pedestrian. But given the way Buffalo looked in week 1, I thought Buffalo was primed to have a big day, and I liked the idea of getting to Diggs. So did you. 38% Diggs in the slant.
Does that go for Josh Allen too, as far as 150 maxers? Because he's one where of the people I'm looking at, it seems like almost everybody, including me, played like 20%.
Josh Allen was 9.9% owned in the slant. You, Alex, Rinpack, and Steve all over that 9.5 or 9.9% mark. He was 13.7% owned. So it seems like Josh Allen was, again, the 150 maxers concentrated play. The only guys more owned by 150 maxers were Justin Herbert at 15% and Brady at 14%. Both of those numbers were basically the same with where we stood. Dak was 12-2 in the entire tournament. He was 11-6 from 150 maxers. After that, it's just a pretty flat exposure across the board. What I do really want to see, and I don't want to overreact to it right now, and I probably should at least wait a little bit before we get into this. So let's do this. Is there anything else from the slant that stood out to you from an ownership perspective? Anything that you saw, just things that you wish you did differently after you saw our actual ownership?
No, not really. I was pretty happy with the plays that I made. They didn't all work out, but like there wasn't a whole lot of, oh man, like I wish I had more of that type stuff. And I didn't think there was really anything too egregious from the field either. I mean, the Steelers pulling 15% as a defense is kind of dumb, but like I understand why that happens as well. But other than that, there wasn't anything too crazy, I don't think.
All righty. Well, schedule for the rest of the day. Let's get this out now, because we have a ton of shows coming up. At 1 p.m. on the Awesemo Odds channel, you get the Awesemo Betting Show with Eitan and Ben. You can't get rid of Ben that quickly, because then he's got the Awesemo Fantasy Football Show again with Eitan and Laffy on the Fantasy Football channel at 2. The Yahoo NFL Show with Pete and Eric is at 3. MLB Live Before Lock. Adam, you will be back with Greg breaking down a little bit of baseball for an hour. Then we go to NFL Deeper Dive with Laffy and Matt Savoca at 6:30. And then NFL Live Before Lock with Eric and Matt Kajeski at 7:30. Tons of content, 6 more live shows to go just for today. Plus, we've got some free content. NFL Showdown ownership if you're playing tonight. And that one's going to be pretty important, because this game's got a bit of a gap in it. The Packers are 11.5-point favorites against the Lions. The Lions stink. That could really make some weird showdown lineups for tonight. So make sure you're paying attention to the ownership. Plus, MLB Top Pitchers is free. Adam can talk a little bit about that at 5:30 when you watch MLB Live Before Lock.
Someone asked about the Darren Waller exposure between us. It kind of bounced around. I had 3%, Rinpack had 7%, Alex had 13%, Steve had none.
5.5% owned for the entire contest. Waller was 4.8% owned by 150 maxers, so nothing really to dig into. The next piece that I want to touch on, Let me make sure that I have this lined up correctly. So we got to talk about the guy that broke the slate. And we're going to go to running back for that bad boy. Probably if you were watching at 2:30 in the afternoon, you probably thought the answer to this one was going to be Cooper Kupp. But Derrick Henry dropped 50.7 fantasy points yesterday. 35 carries, 182 yards, and 3 TDs. But he caught 6 balls for 55 yards. So 200 and plus yards of overall offense. Alex had none. Steve had none. You had none. Rinpack had 13%. Kudos to Rinpack on that one. 4.9% owned Derrick Henry in the slant. And if you look at the 150 max ownership for Derrick Henry, it's not great. 3. The entire 150 max field was even lighter than the normal field was in aggregate. What were your thoughts, just generally speaking, on Henry going into the slate? And is this something that we should have looked at a little bit deeper? Should Derrick Henry just, like, if he's 5% owned, does he just immediately become a good GPP play?
So yeah, he does. He's always a good GPP play if he's low owned. The thing yesterday that makes me not even upset that I didn't get to him, though, like that I don't necessarily think I really should have. You also had low ownership on Kamara at 9%. Cook was 5%, and McCaffrey was only 7%. They were a little bit more expensive, but they were all similar in that you kind of had to make some sacrifices to pay up for them. To me, in full point PPR, like I realize how good Derrick Henry is and how high his ceiling is, but in full point PPR, if I can get low owned Kamara, Cook, McCaffrey, I'm going to those guys before I get to Henry. So it's kind of whatever there. Like I'd feel differently. So I guess the answer is, yeah, he's always a strong tournament play if he's 5% owned because the ceiling is so high. He's a stronger tournament play if the other expensive running backs are significantly more popular than he is.
So that's the interesting piece here. Christian McCaffrey, 7% owned overall in the slant, 5% by 150 maxers. Dalvin Cook, 5% owned in the slant, 6.2% owned by the 150 maxers. Kamara was 9% owned overall, 9% owned by 150 maxers. So it looks like if anybody was going to anyone, it ended up being a little bit heavier from the 150 guys to Dalvin Cook. But ultimately, it seems like we just, when I say we, it seems like the collective was just avoiding the pay up running backs. McCaffrey, Cook, Kamara, Henry, all really not all that owned. Do you think that as a whole is just a little bit of a mistake? Should we have been paying up more for what we know to be the consistency of the top end of running backs?
I didn't really think so on that slate. It was just really difficult to do. I mean, you had Carson at a really good price tag. You had Najee Harris at a good price tag. Damian Harris was fairly priced. If you wanted lower owned guys, you could go to Drake at 4,900. There were enough like good mid-range running backs and enough wide receivers you wanted to pay for too. Like you're allocating money to some combination of Kupp, Allen, Cooper, Lamb, Hopkins, Diggs. Like I thought that was where a lot of upside was. So like obviously I like getting to those really good running backs when they're low owned, but I thought it was really difficult to really prioritize them.
Is that a sign where we should have been paying up to be contrarian?
I don't really think so because, or like not necessarily, because I think it was kind of difficult to get the same sort of ceiling by doing so. Like if you're going from, let's say, Chris Carson to Christian McCaffrey, of course that's an upgrade, but that also means you're probably going from like CD Lamb or Stephon Diggs down to, you know, Waddle or Chase or something like that, where like, yeah, they're good, but the gap is pretty big between those guys. So like, I think it was a viable route, and, you know, like I was slightly over on Cook. I was like double the field on Kamara. So like, obviously I thought it was a good idea. I just thought it was hard to do in, you know, a ton of lineups.
Yeah. I don't know. There's something about it that's making me feel like this should be something that I put a pin in for the future to think about if the entire top flight running backs, McCaffrey, Kamara, Cook, Henry, guys that we know their workload's not changed. The only thing that's slowing them down is an injury. Otherwise, these guys are going to be the most involved guys on their teams. I wonder if I should try to force that a little bit more, almost the way that we would bump hitter projections. Is there do you think that there's any sort of similar mechanism to the way that we would bump a hitter in comparison to pitchers for baseball for running backs and wideouts, instead of like getting quarterbacks and tight ends and the defenses? Could that be should we be prioritizing the top end more?
I mean, what you're saying makes sense. I don't really think I need to do that. Like when I look at the players that I had the most of, like, Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, Kupp, Godwin, like those are the guys that I want. I had a lot of Kamara. So like, I don't think it's working out for me the way that I would want it to anyway.
Okay. Yeah, it's just hitting me now. Like I've never thought about, up until being here, I never thought about changing projections to not be the projection in Fantasy Cruncher ever. And then like the bumping of hitter projections became sort of a pretty standard thing that happens for baseball just because of the way that the roster construction works. I've never thought about it at all for NFL. And I wonder if there's something there.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're someone who is like constantly paying up at quarterback and sacrificing running backs or wide receivers, then yeah, something to look at. But like, to me, not getting a lot of those top end running backs yesterday isn't really a sign anything is wrong, because you had very good mid-range running back plays. You had very good receiver plays. Like if you weren't paying up at running back and you also were just jamming in like Jalen Waddle, Jamar Chase, paying down at wide receiver, then yeah, something you probably should look into that. But if you were just, paying up for receivers instead of running backs, I think that's fine.
Okay. Something I want to look into further. That's for sure. I'm fascinated by it. 150 maxers were pretty heavy in the top, first, fifth, sixth, seventh. Kudos to John Galt, by the way, finishing first and second in the slant last night. I guess now's about that time that we should take a look at that winning lineup. Kyler Murray in the winning spot, Derrick Henry, Darrell Henderson, Cortland Sutton, KJ Osborne, Rondell Moore, Rob Gronkowski, Mike Williams, and the Rams D. So you got the Kyler, Rondell Moore stack. You brought it back with KJ Osborne, scored that touchdown very early. That looked pretty good. The rest of this, I mean, it's a lineup that hit all the spots that it needed to hit. And when push comes, like, there's 63,000 entries. You're probably going to get there with more individuals in that spot. Do you see anything in that lineup that stands out to you?
Hang on, let me pull it up. I was going to answer something in chat because they're talking about Henry. In the lineup that came in first.
Yeah.
Can you read it off again? My computer froze.
You're good. So Kyler and Rondell Moore is a stack. Derrick Henry, Darrell Henderson at running back. Cortland Sutton, KJ Osborne, Gronk, Mike Williams, and the Rams D. Yeah. Looks totally fine. Like, it
looks good to me.
Yeah, I don't really have much else to say here. I mean, I wasn't like a huge KJ Osborne guy, but at least it's on the opposite side of the Arizona game. Like, there's correlation with the lineup itself.
I was going to say, I did explicitly remove KJ Osborne from my Arizona stack rule, but that's a me problem.
We sort of talked about it too. I don't think it was our show. I think it was on Live Before Lock. I talked about how I wanted more Thielen and Jefferson in lineups where I didn't have Dalvin Cook. And somebody, I can't remember if it was Eric or Matt, was just like, oh, like, what are your thoughts on like someone like KJ Osborne? I was like, I don't really want to bump a $3,300 guy, because then he's just going to get forced in as like the value play that works. So he's not the guy that gets added to that boost. And sure as shit, he scored like a 70-yard touchdown or whatever, almost right out of the gate.
Yeah, no, it's a solid lineup. Correlations there. Has the Arizona stack, has the run back, which, you don't need, but it's nice. He has the Henderson and Rams pairing, which again, you don't need, but it does add more correlation to the lineup as well.
So he also finished fifth rather. I don't know why I said second before. He also finished fifth. Another solid lineup, but 17 points off of the main lineup. Blake Jarwin at tight end didn't get him there enough, but he had Jamar Chase and Chubb and Deontay Johnson, but he had enough Derrick Henry to make things worth his while. Either way, it's a good lineup as far as I'm concerned. Kudos to John Galt for picking up 50,000 there, plus another 10 for finishing fifth. It's a great contest. It really is. It's not the best contest that was running yesterday, because that one took place on Yahoo. And if you weren't in that one, you made a giant mistake, because that's probably going to be the best it's going to be on any site, anywhere, for any sport all year.
Yeah. Jumped in there, basically broke even, but that's definitely the stuff that you should be prioritizing.
Yeah, they were like $350,000 short of filling the prize pool or something along those lines. I mean, that's staggering amount of money. Just totally crazy. All right, I'm scrolling all the way to the bottom now. I want to find out who did the best with the least. So lowest score. This can't be right. Everybody entered a lineup? Is that real? Normally there's some blanks. Oh no, I'm not even close. Where are the rest? Do I have a filter? I'm only getting to like the 27,000. Is this just not sorted correctly? I want to see what the garbage is at the bottom. There it is. All right, lots of blanks. Man, can you imagine like 150 maxing this and forgetting to put your lineups in? God, that's brutal.
Yeah, I've done it. I mean, not in this tournament specifically, but.
All right, lowest lineup. Let's see. No stack. All right, Fields, no. Winston, this one could work. Okay. I mean, that's one way to do it. What was the final of the Carolina and New Orleans game?
Wow. I don't know.
26-7. Cajun 1960. It's the second lowest scoring lineup here. Went full onslaught Saints. Winston, Kamara, Ty Montgomery, Traquan Smith, Adam Troutman, Tony Jones, Saints D with Jarvis Landry and Justin Jefferson. 45 fantasy points scored.
Yeah. Anytime you compare a receiver that's on IR with your quarterback, you should do it.
All right. So I kind of want to throw that one out because of Traquan Smith. The next one up works. It's Dolphins onslaught. Yikes. Tua, Gaskin, Parker, Waddle, Gesicki, Dolphins D with Jarvis Landry, so former Dolphin, Alvin Kamara, and Amari Cooper. I mean, that's an on-purpose lineup as best I could tell. And obviously, Tua getting hurt didn't help, but it's not like things were going very well for Miami. So John ADT, you get the reverse award for not having a lineup that did all that well. Anything else you want to touch on from the slant?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay. Yeah, it's a weird one. I don't have a ton to really want to dig into. So let's do this. NFL Strategy Show is the promo code for you. You can get yourself an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. Covers everything. Projections, ownership, premium Slack, top pitchers and top stacks for NFL. It covers everything, every sport. So if you're looking to get behind the paywall, use the promo code NFL Strategy Show. One giant word that will get you signed up. And also, shout out to No House Advantage for being the presenting sponsor of this show, whether that's NBA, MLB, NFL, PGA. You can get in any contest you want. We have a ton of No House Advantage tools on the site that'll help you enter your lineups. You won't even have to do a lot of work. You could use the promo code Awesemo. If you're a new user at No House Advantage, get a $25 instant match deposit bonus when you sign up using that promo code. Love having No House Advantage as the sponsor. They've been sponsoring my contenders videos, which makes me like them even more. So you guys should go check out No House Advantage. All right, Adam, I told you at the beginning of the show, I wanted to talk about cash a little bit. Something that we don't generally talk about, I think, enough, honestly. But there's a couple things that I want to look at first. So, Jordan, if you want to switch over to that massive double, you already did that. Great. If you want to switch over there, I want to look at a few things. The first thing that I want to look at is the winning lineup for the massive $25 double up single entry. So this is $25 to get in, double up, and everybody's only getting one entry. I think it's a really great tournament to like test your mettle in cash. Anyway, the winning lineup, I'm going to read this off. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best, 1 being the worst, I want you to tell me how you feel about this lineup for cash. Matt Stafford, Derrick Henry, Ezekiel Elliott, Cooper Kupp, Mike Williams, Marvin Jones, Zach Ertz, Leonard Fournette, Bills D.
I think it's terrible.
Okay. The amount of people that look at this tournament and see that this lineup won the contest, I would guess that more people think that that's good than bad. That lineup, knowing what he has, I would want to play head-to-heads against him always. And he won. And I feel like people wouldn't look at that. So when you look at that out of like just on the surface, I don't even know what the first thing that I want to ask you is, but like, it's just simply not a cash lineup. You should not be having Matt Stafford. There is no scenario where you should really be getting to Derrick Henry, although you can sneak your way into that one in a weird way if you needed to. Zach Ertz is just a full punt of title. Like this lineup is structurally incorrect. What would you tell somebody that's looking at this? Like, can you explain why that's bad?
I mean, in cash, you're typically playing either some version of like the highest projected lineup. It doesn't have to be necessarily like the actual highest projected. Like maybe you're going to value getting a third running back or something like that, and you're willing to shave off a point or two for floor reasons. But I mean, typically in a double up like this, you can get a pretty good idea of how your lineup is constructed by the total ownership of it. Like maybe you get like, 1, 4, or 5% owned guy because it was like the last guy in and got you everything else you wanted. But when you have, a 3% owned Stafford with a 3% owned Henry with a 0.5% owned Ertz, 3% owned Marvin Jones, like they're just not the best plays at their prices. Like Matt Stafford is fine in tournaments. Like he's a good quarterback. The Rams offense is good, whatever. He was $400 less than Dak, $300 less than Herbert, $500 less than Brady. These are all quarterbacks in, better spots that projected better. So you should be getting to one of those guys. Derrick Henry, I mean, you had basically free squares at running back in Najee Harris and Chris Carson. So from a roster construction standpoint, paying up for someone like Henry or Kamara or McCaffrey was probably a mistake, unless, like you were kind of alluding to, unless you just like kind of rounded out the rest of your lineup. And then, for lack of a better phrase, your last guy in was Derrick Henry by all means. But you shouldn't be paying $2,000 more for him than somebody like Carson. At the same time, going to Fournette at 5,100, he doesn't have any sort of solidified role on that team, really. There's going to be weeks that it's Jones, maybe not, but like Fournette is clearly riskier than guys like Carson and Harris that are playing like every snap for their respective teams. Mike Williams is fine. It was a good game environment, but similarly priced to guys like Lamb and Cooper, who just dominate targets in their offense. So it's just a lot of plays that are like, they're fine individually, but they're nowhere near the best plays at their position or price.
And generally speaking, the top of a double up like this is going to be a lot of people doing the wrong thing in cash. Lineup number 3, Brady, Henry, Mike Evans, Mike Williams, Tyler Lockett, James O'Shaughnessy, Cardinals D. The only, like, everybody's in single digits in ownership except for Noah Fant. Like, if you are getting to the top of this, either chalk went ballistic, every single highly owned piece hit, and that's what you're seeing at the top. Or on a day like today, where nobody's really all that heavily owned, the top lineups in a massive double up are going to be negative indicators of what you should do. So a lot of people are going to pull up contests and try to repeat what the people that won did. This is a terrible example of doing that. You should be doing basically the opposite of that in a double up situation. GPPs are going to be, you're looking for the construction. On a double up, you basically actively want to do the opposite.
Yeah.
Like these are bad lineups for cash.
Yeah, I'll say the exception. So one thing, if you're someone like trying to pull up lineups and like learn, if you're going to good players, do try and keep an eye out for like if they were likely to have late swapped on that slate, because obviously you don't really want to learn from what wasn't intended to be their lineup. And then also you do want low owned players if your lineup is garbage after the 1 o'clock games. That would be an exception.
And that is what I'm leading to, because you did not have the cash lineup that you actually have in this contest when you locked at 1 o'clock. You are profitable in cash now and likely would not have been profitable without these moves. Your final cash lineup now is Tom Brady, Jonte Williams, Najee Harris, Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, Tyler Lockett, Tyler Higbee, Chris Carson, and the Jets. This is not what you submitted at 1 o'clock, but you did not have Cooper Kupp in your cash lineup to start. What was going through your head at 3:30, 4 o'clock prior to making these moves? What did you have, and what moves did you make, and why did you do it?
Yeah, so after the 1 o'clock games, I had the mediocre game from Jonte Williams, who was my last guy in. Like, I didn't want him, but basically on my original lineup, I had decided, like, I knew I was going to play 3 out of the 4 of Keenan Allen, Lamb, Cooper, and Kupp. I ended up deciding I wanted all 3 receivers from the Dallas game, so I lost Kupp. Williams ended up being the last guy in that let me get to Lamb. So that's why I had him. He wasn't someone I really wanted. He just kind of was there as my last piece. Higbee, I thought at tight end, it was basically either him or Noah Fant. My particular lineup, I needed the $100 savings. So Higbee ended up in there. Harris was a clear cash running back, like one of the free squares. But originally I had Dak at quarterback. I had either Dak or Herbert at quarterback, with Lamb, Allen, Cooper, Carson. that was the open spots I had at 4:00. But so I had the very popular build. I just didn't have Cup. So I was going to be blocked by a lot of people. So like in 50-50s, I just completely swapped it. In head-to-heads, I swapped against anyone that had like a lot of time remaining. If they only had like one player left, I just stuck with what I, with my Cowboy stack. But in 50-50s, it was basically like, there's no way I'm catching these Cup teams, not to mention Noah Fant was also popular and had a much better game than Higbee. So it was kind of just like, I'm drawing dead in 50-50s because I don't have Cup and Fant. The only way I can salvage some money is to hope the Dallas game goes sideways, just play a bunch of high upside plays that aren't the best plays from the late games. So went from the Dallas or Charger stack, whichever it was, I don't remember my quarterback, to the Tampa Bay stack, stuck with Carson. He just fit, and then threw in Tyler Lockett because he was a wide receiver that clearly could have a big game. So like it's not something you want to be doing, but you're going to get a better return over time if you're doing that than if you're just saying, oh, okay, I'm just going to take a huge loss today.
And it's weird because by putting together a good cash lineup to start, you are more likely to have to make these moves. If you're making bad lineups from the beginning, you might not have to make that late swap because you already have the guys you shouldn't have in cash. But because you played it correctly, you were set up to already make that move. There was not really going to be any incentive for you to hold hands with highly owned plays in your lineup and never make it back to the cut line that you needed to get to.
Yeah,
I love seeing this happen because you would look at this on the surface and be like, don't look very cashy, but half of it was cashy. You see the Chris Carson 40% owned, Higbee, Jets D, Najee Harris. The rest of it was just like, all right, well, I need to flip this on its head because I need to make up points.
Yeah, and it's just, it's a probability thing. Like most of the time, it's going to be a waste of time because it's not going to cash either way. Like if the Dallas game did what it was supposed to, this lineup still wouldn't have cashed because it didn't have Fant and it didn't have Cup. But you're at least giving yourself a chance. Like one specific example for me that I remember from like years ago, and it might have been a tournament actually, but whatever it was in baseball, and I was coming up. I was like close to the cut line, but I had Clayton Kershaw to go, and like a million teams in front of me also had Kershaw. So it was just like, this lineup isn't going to cash. And I swapped to some like 4K pitcher going up against Kershaw, just saying like, okay, there's a 0% chance that I win if I stick with Kershaw. There's like a 2% chance I win if I switch. And Kershaw like got hurt or something, and the 4K guy beat him, and I profited. So that's just like one of the things that it stuck with me from when I was first, getting into DFS, where you're going to make more money, even if most of the time it doesn't matter. You're going from a 0% chance of cashing to, a 20% chance or something over the course of a season. That makes a really big difference.
I think I had the second highest aggregate ownership projection. I guess that makes me happy. Yeah, I did. How many people had my lineup? However many people finished 1,315th. I'm going to say it out loud since it won. Herbert, Carson, Harris, Lamb, Cup, Jamar Chase. Very happy to luck box that one. Tyler Higbee, Keenan Allen, and Jets D. Worked out well enough. I'll take it.
Yeah, I think that was really similar to what my highest projected lineup was that I ended up not using.
Papa Gates also played my cash lineup.
Yeah.
Dean played my cash lineup. I don't recognize any of these other names.
Yeah, Herbert, Carson, Harris, Lamb, Cup, Chase, Higbee, Allen, Jets. Yeah, I think mine was really similar. My initial one. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was a little bit different somewhere, but that was clearly one of the. Basically, like you were gonna have at least three, or probably three of the four. Cup, Lamb, Cooper, Allen. You're probably gonna have Chase. Waddle, I think, was a reasonable one if you couldn't afford Chase as well.
Waddle was this, like, they were not separated by much when I was looking at my cash lineups. It just happened to be Chase over Waddle, but that was a coin flip for me.
Yeah. I'm sure everybody, like any name you recognize, had Carson and Harris, and then you were playing one of Herbert or Dak, potentially Brady, but really Herbert or Dak, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, really difficult to not have Chris Carson and Najee Harris in your cash lineup. Both guys were 50% owned in this double up. they were in everything. When I sorted my first crunch. So when I do a cash crunch, it's, I'll do 100 lineups, no randomness, 100% exposure. I want the best things that it's going to crank out. And basically every single one of them, save for like one or two spots where Damian Harris snuck in, Chris Carson and Najee Harris were like as close to cash game locks as you can get to.
Yeah.
What would it take for you to not have one of those guys?
Accidentally Xing them out of my player pool and not realizing it or something.
Okay.
Yeah, there was no way that there was no question on those guys. The only questions I thought on yesterday's slate were which quarterback out of the two, three, if you want to include Brady, that were, priced about the same. So which of the quarterbacks, which three receivers, because you couldn't really get all four of Kupp, Allen, Lamb, Cooper.
Yeah.
Which tight end between Higbee and Fant, and then the defense, is it going to end up being the Jets or the Eagles, basically? Like the Steelers is where you really wanted to get, but it was really difficult. Those were pretty much the questions I think. Oh, and then, like the last piece. So like Chase was good. I thought Waddle was fine. I ended up going Williams just because I needed that $100 off of Waddle to get Lamb. That was one of the things. Yeah. Basically forcing in Lamb and Allen in my particular build, wanting both of them is what really put me in a bad situation in cash. But
you and I had a really long conversation before lock about the, with Williams, Chase, you going to Amari Cooper. Like you and I talked about this for a while. It's honestly probably would have been a pretty decent piece of content if we would have just opened it up.
Yeah. But yeah, that's where I think the questions was like the last piece between Chase, Waddle, some other cheap guy. Which of the three main receivers are you using? Which tight end? Basically, flipping a coin between Higbee and Fant, and then the same thing at quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like maybe we can think about this for moving forward, but like we could lay out basically the large construction of this. You would say, for all intents and purposes, you're either rostering Justin Herbert or Dak Prescott. I think there's a case to be made that you can go to Brady. He got to 10% ownership, but even at the same time, like Herbert and Dak was the question. Chris Carson and Najee Harris should have been the first two names that you're putting in there in running backs. There's a pool of wideouts of Allen, Lamb, Kupp, Cooper to an extent. Jamar Chase ended up being more owned than Amari Cooper, which I guess makes me feel a little bit better. But, you mentioned, wow, where the hell is his ownership? Wow, Waddle was 7% owned. So
yeah,
that's interesting to see that it definitely became Chase for sure. I'm happy that I went to Chase over Waddle then in that theory. But I mean, the pool of potential cash options for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I couldn't remember how many spots are in a DraftKings lineup. The pool of potential DraftKings options in a cash lineup for like 8 of the positions is like 3 or 4 deep at best. Like,
yeah. And
if you're not in that very clear top section for 8 of your 9 picks, like you're probably doing something wrong somewhere.
Yeah. And typically that's how it's going to go. Like sometimes you'll end up with, one piece that's low owned just because it gets you everything else that you wanted. Waddle in that case, it's at 7%. Like I'm sure a lot of the lineups that have Waddle have very, very similar builds otherwise where Waddle's kind of just the last piece in. But in general, that's how it's going to be in cash. Like if you're watching content and people are saying like, oh, he's viable in cash, he's viable in cash, he's viable in cash about like, 25 guys, they probably have no idea what the hell they're talking about.
Yep. 100%. It's like you can just see it from the ownership. Najee Harris, 53, Keenan Allen, 50. For all intents and purposes, you're going to have both of those guys. It's going to be hard to get away from that. Allen's going to be a little bit easier just for this particular slate. But I mean, when you start getting down into like the teens pretty quickly, the concentration of Harris, Allen, Lamb, Carson, Herbert, Kupp, Chase, Fant, and Higbee draws the line. Everybody that I just named is 25% or higher. You're probably getting to like 5 of those guys by default. And if you're not, you should be going back to the drawing board and trying to figure this out. And this is the easiest way to do it for cash. For cash games, either find some pros that you respect and see what they're doing, but really look at the ownership for this contest and figure out where you are. If you've got a couple guys that are down in like the 1 to 2% range, and this was not because of late swaps, you got to go back to the drawing board here. Something you're looking at is not correct. We don't talk about cash I think nearly enough. I don't know if it's because we just take it for granted. Like we know what we're supposed to do. We have, there's no opinions for cash for the most part, or at least there shouldn't be. This is very hands off for me. I don't try to dig into it. Maybe I have two lineups where I'm just trying to feel which one I feel is like personally better for me. Like maybe I just want to cheer for this one a little bit more. But in general, I don't think that there are a lot of options for you. And if you're trying to get better in cash, just simply looking at the ownership after the fact is going to help you tremendously.
Yeah. And being like honest with yourself when you reflect on your lineup too. Like, I think the lineup that I initially played was fine. I don't think it was the best lineup I could make. Like, I think I got too enamored with wanting all three of the receivers from the Cowboys game when realistically the range of outcomes for all of them was about the same. So I should have been knowing that, like, if I went to Kupp, I could get Chase instead of Jonte Williams, having to use that final Jonte Williams piece. I should have been willing to do that. And I kind of just like, I was nervous not having every piece of the Cowboys game. But like in hindsight, I think my lineup was okay. I don't think it was the best lineup I could have made. And when you're playing cash, like the margin for error is not that wide. So it's not, like you don't want to just go back and look at it and say like, oh, okay, I did okay. It wasn't the best, move on. Like you need to learn from that and not make those mistakes again, because the margin for error is not really big.
If you could go back in time, do you have an idea? Like you don't go to Williams, you assume you have Kupp, then do you think you're probably where I'm at? Do you think you end up with Chase?
I think I ended up, let me see if I still have it. Okay. I think I ended up with Chase in my like actual top projected lineup.
I want to see if I still have my stuff here too.
Yeah, like I think I have my projections in still. It's just I have so many groups set that I'm trying to cancel.
I think I still have my cash crunch because I said I run it all in a different table so they don't blend together. Is this Herbert card? Okay, yeah. So would have been really good. My second ranked cash lineup. These two were far and away but the top two that I had. The one that we had on the screen or still have on the screen is there. The only change that gets made to it is swapping out Higbee for Fant. So in hindsight, I would really like to make that switch, although it didn't make a difference for me, but I would have had 15 more points or whatever the hell Fant had ahead of Higbee. If it's not that switch, my difference is swapping out the Jets D to the Eagles D. Yeah.
So my actual top projected lineup, and this, I adjusted my projections a little bit between when I made my cash lineups and now, but actually has Brady, but Brady, even this, you can kind of see, you can see the build, and then it's just a matter of kind of hammering out the details. Brady, Harris, Carson, Chase, Kupp, Lamb, Higbee, Cooper, Eagles. So,
Cooper, Eagles. Okay. So my first Brady lineup is Allen, Jets.
Yeah.
And then so, Cooper Eagles is second of all of that you just described. The one that you just said was my 10th ranked cash lineup.
Yeah. My second lineup is Dak, and it actually gets the three running backs. It goes all the way down to the Vikings defense at 2,100, but Dak, Damian Harris, Najee, Kupp, Lamb, Cooper, Higbee, Carson, Vikings defense. But basically what you're getting is that, again, you're going to need three of those receivers. You're definitely playing Harris and Chris Carson. I think I was just higher on Amari than other people yesterday because he's in, if I crunch my top 30 lineups, he's in all of them.
Oh yeah. So I don't have that same sort of scenario. He shows up in my fourth cash lineup. Herbert, Harris, Carson, Chase, Kupp, Lamb, Higbee, Cooper, Eagles. And then he's in a couple of them, but Cooper Kupp is in basically everything. CeeDee Lamb is largely in everything. Higbee over Fant is a priority. Keenan Allen is probably like 2 or 3 to 1 on Cooper. Najee Harris and Chris Carson are in every single one that I see, except for one where Damian Harris sort of just sneaks in. But I didn't really get a lot of Dak, actually. I got a ton of Justin Herbert, a small amount of Tom Brady, and then Josh Allen was the guy that snuck in the most for me.
Yeah.
I'm trying because of an ownership scenario, like that shit just tumbled to the bottom.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what's different. Easy for me to say. I think I have something messed up in Cruncher right now, but I can't figure it out because these lineups look totally different than the ones that I was building. I mean, not totally different. They're basically the same, but they look very different in a couple of places than the ones I was building yesterday. Like I was getting nowhere near this much Brady. I was getting a lot more Dak and Herbert. I wasn't getting 100% Cooper. I was getting more Allen as well. So yeah, these are a little bit different than the ones I was coming up with yesterday, but it still gives you the general build. And that's kind of the point. Like, even if you're not going to play like the absolute top projected lineup, you at least can look at those and pretty quickly get an idea of what it looks like. And then you just kind of have to hammer out the details on, which 3 receivers, which tight end, which quarterback.
Riley Brock in chat said, dumb question, I know, new to this, but what is a cash game? A cash game is going to be a contest that pays out roughly 50% of the prize pool. So double ups are going to be paying out a little bit less than that. 50-50s are legitimately 50. Head-to-heads are just shy of 50 since they're taking rake. But generally speaking, GPPs are paying out, 25%. We're going to see cash games paying out around 50%. So that could be head-to-heads, 50-50s, double ups. You can get into some other like weirder stuff that also pay out a little bit higher, but that's just going to be in general what we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, the pieces for cash seem to fit pretty easily yesterday. It was something that I wanted to dig into when I started looking at a couple of those lineups that were at the top, where I just assume that so many people pull up lineups that win massive field 50-50s and GPPs and 50-50s and double ups and try to recreate that. And that is just not the way to win money long term. Those lineups are generally going to be lower median projection lineups.
That's more so than anything. Ideal. Like when we talk in tournaments about going into lineup study and pulling up players that you respect that you think are good. It's still difficult in tournaments to like you can get an idea of where what good tournament players are trying to do, but it can be really difficult to like recreate their entire process because there's so many moving parts that go into it. In cash games, I think it's a lot easier to just pull up good players. They're going to have a lot of overlap on most of their lineup. So you can kind of just, it's pretty clear cut typically if you're on the right track or not.
Yeah. I like talking about cash. I think it goes underrepresented now. I'm happy to be playing it.
Yeah.
I honestly, I enjoy it more.
I was gonna say, I actually find it pretty fun. I always thought it was boring, but like, to me, it's kind of just like solving a puzzle. Cause like, if you view it as there being one correct lineup basically, and you're trying to figure it out, like, like I was saying with my lineup yesterday, I think it was okay. But I don't think it was the correct lineup. I don't think it was the right one. So it kind of becomes like a game. And I think it's actually a lot more fun than I give it credit for.
And it's certainly different on a large field, 13 game slate, where tonight, for example, from a showdown perspective, more often than not, there is a right lineup. Sometimes you can make a case that there's, a 1v1 pivot that looks pretty similar. But I mean, for every single showdown slate we've had so far, you and I message each other, say, hey, do you got this? Yes. And then we just move on. Like we haven't had any ambiguity so far this season in showdown.
No, in showdown so far, I think it's typically been, there's been normally like 1 or 2, like 2v2s where it's just like, okay, this is reasonable. Obviously the one that I play, I think is the best, but it's been pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And, it's another thing where we look it up and it's like, all right, these 15 really good dudes have the lineup that we're playing. These 15 really good dudes have the other 2v2. Anything else that you don't have is probably like not the correct way to have played that cash lineup for showdown. So make sure you're paying attention to my posts with sim odds and all of the showdown content we have on the website and whatever Adam's about to say right now. I thought you were about to say something.
No, someone in chat has said in a tournament where you have to beat 10 entries with one lineup, should you play a cash or a GPP lineup? And that's a question that comes up a lot. I think typically the answer is going to be, so it's kind of two part. In theory, a tournament lineup, because you're still trying to finish in the top 10%. So, even though it's only 9 entries you have to beat, like, yeah, it can be a little bit chalkier, but you're still going to want to play a contrarian lineup. The difference is if it's a tournament where you expect to be substantially better than the other 9 people, then just play, your best lineup. Like, for example, if I'm playing a 10-person winner take all actual tournament on DraftKings, I'm going to probably do something to make it contrarian and give myself a chance at first. If I'm playing a 10-person winner take all with 9 of my friends from back home that don't play DraftKings, I'm going to just play my cash lineup and assume that it's better than whatever they're playing.
Absolutely. David Porter says, well, y'all convinced me. Maybe I'll take a second look at cash. So for so long, like, a lot of people will be just like, cash isn't worth my time. And like, I think what you mean is cash isn't worth the bankroll that I have, because there's no time for cash.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what it always comes back to. Like, from just an hourly and an investment standpoint, if you don't have a big bankroll, typically you're probably better off just playing the cheapest tournaments you can, because the fields are going to be softer. You can make more money, in a day kind of thing. If you're playing, $100 of cash, you're expecting to basically make, $5 to $10 a day. But if you can afford to, get a decent amount down, to where the money that, if you have 5 to 7% ROI to where you're making decent money, then it's, I think, a pretty good idea. And again, it just goes back to your goals as well. Like for me, when I initially started playing some more cash, it was because I was at a point where it was like, okay, I've made a decent amount of money from DFS. I'm in a pretty good spot, financially. I would rather just like grind out some steady profits than risk going broke for, the 15th time in my life. So like, it kind of just, it depends on your goals too. If you're just playing for entertainment and, trying to hopefully get lucky and make money, then of course, just play tournaments. But there is, I think, there's still a place for cash. And I think it depends on sports too. Like NFL, definitely still an edge. MLB is pretty tough because there's not that much action, especially this time of the year. So you're kind of just like playing 1v1s and 2v2s against other really good players. NBA at the beginning of the year, it's pretty easy, and then kind of gets tougher. But NFL in particular, it's, I think, the easiest sport for cash.
And it also feels really nice to just simply win and go, at least in this season, 11-7 or something, or 12-6, instead of winning one slate, and that pays off the other 16 losers. But anyway, that's it. We are done. Adam, anything else you want to touch on before we get out of here? Because we just hit our mark.
I agree with David Porter that DK's Showdown product is way better than FanDuel's.
It's not even remotely close. Guys, thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining us. Apologies for cutting Adam out of that me scenario right there. Tons of content coming up. Make sure you're watching it. Like, subscribe, notification bell, all that jazz. Adam and I will be back again next Monday to do this one again. Good luck for week 3 in the NFL.